अब मैं दावत खिताब दूँगा आज की इस तकरीब के सदर आज़ाद जम्मू कश्मीर जनाब सरदार मोहम्मद मसूद खान को तशरीफ़ लाएँ और इज़हार ख्याल फरमाएँ।
कश्मीर राजा फारूक हैदर खान साहब, सैयद शौकत साहब शाह, मिनिस्टर AJK गवर्नमेंट चौधरी मोहम्मद सईद, ऑनरेबल अब्दुल रशीद तुराबी, अमीर जमात इस्लामी आज़ाद जम्मू एंड कश्मीर, चीफ जस्टिस मंजूर गिलानी, गुलाम मोहम्मद सफ़ी साहब, कन्वीनर APHC, डॉक्टर मोहम्मद खान, मेंबर पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशन, वाइस चांसलर्स, सेक्रेटरीज, academics, Hurriyat leaders, students, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. The subject given to me is stratagem for winning a favorable global response on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. Before I speak on the subject, I just want to underline one point. Those who are speaking up for Kashmir in any part of the world, whether they are in IOK, Indian Occupied Kashmir, in Pakistan, in the diaspora community, all over the world, they are being targeted from within and without. And this is also something that we have to counter. Therefore, stand firm, because particularly the ones who would hold the flag of Kashmir high, they would become targets of the Indian intelligence agencies, their entire political leadership, their bureaucracy, and also they would like to influence constituencies within Pakistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Let me also congratulate Dr. Muhammad Khan, Mr. Muhammad Idris Khan Abbasi, Mr. Muhammad Idris Abbasi, Secretary Kashmir Liberation Cell, for constituting Policy and Research Forum. This is a very important development, because when I assumed the presidency of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, I had conversations with Raja Farooq Haider Sahab, and I said that this state doesn't have a think tank. That when people sitting in Washington or Brussels or London, they want to look up for information in regard to Kashmir, they do not come to Muzaffarabad. They do not go to Islamabad. They go straight to think tanks all around the world. And let me tell you that Indian think tanks are very active, and they're producing malicious material against Pakistan, against the people of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And we did not have a voice to defend ourselves. But now we have this think tank, and it's a very good initiative. I would also like to say that, but this is a beginning. Let's not sit on our laurels. And as somebody mentioned, Dr. Muhammad Khan is a very dedicated and committed academic, and we are optimistic that in the months and years to come, he will refine this forum and make it into a state-of-the-art think tank. While the Prime Minister was speaking, he just whispered into my ears that it's not just one stand-alone think tank that we're going to have, that it would be replicated in the universities, the 5 universities that we have in Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And there we need fuller participation of the vice chancellors, of the academic bodies, and most importantly of the students. Let me also pay a tribute to the APHC leadership and young men and women of Kashmir, who despite all the odds are waging the struggle against the Indian occupation forces. India is an occupier of that territory, and they are using all sorts of brutalities to intimidate the people of occupied Kashmir into submission. But our people there, our brothers and sisters, are defiant. Since this is an academic setting, it is, as the Prime Minister said, it is not essentially a political setting. Therefore, remaining within the framework of the topic that has been given to me, let me identify the causes of the oppression in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Indian occupied Kashmir. And let's eliminate all other possibilities logically one by one. Is Pakistan responsible for them? No. Is the United Nations responsible for them? No. India solely is responsible for coercion in the Indian occupied Kashmir. Let's be very clear about it, because we start criticizing ourselves. We start criticizing the victims, for God's sake. But India is responsible for killings, disappearances, attacks on youths, illegal detentions, there are forced disappearances, incognito incarcerations. There are attempts to change demography there. And then, of course, we bear the brunt. We here in Azad Kashmir bear the brunt of the fire, hostile fire across the LOC, line of control. There's an information blackout. One of the speakers were talking about it. There's an information blackout there. Let me tell you that despite all the coercion, despite all the economic blandishments dished out by India, the occupiers, despite all their attempts to demonize Pakistan, India's attempts to demonize Pakistan and Kashmiris, we are still holding our ground. And no matter what happens, we will not compromise on our essential rights, our fundamental rights. And this is the message that is disturbing Indian occupation forces and their masters in Delhi, that no matter what happens, the people of the Indian occupied Kashmir, young men and women, are ready to give their blood for the liberation of Kashmir. And the slogans that you hear in Srinagar and Sopore and Chopaiya and other cities, it says, go India, go back, leave our Kashmir. And they say, Azadi, we want Azadi. And then they define it. They say that Azadi ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah. And they say, Pakistan se rishta kya, la ilaha illallah. Make no mistake, they are signaling their absolute solidarity with the people of Pakistan and with the state of Pakistan. Let me also try to deconstruct the reasons for weak global response. It is because of realpolitik, because profits matter, because strategic alliances matter, and that's why some of the nations, the most powerful nations, some of whom are permanent members of the Security Council, they have decided to align themselves with India to block China, and that includes the United States-led coalition, and in that coalition you have France and the United Kingdom, and you also have Russian Federation, which is subtly distancing itself from India, but it has been a long-standing ally of India. So because of realpolitik, because of power politics, these states have decided to align with India. Profits. I was in Brussels and in London and in New York, and I had some candid conversations. And people are saying that we are siding with India because our profits, our economic interests are involved with India. I said, what about human rights standards? What about human rights treaties and conventions and resolutions that you drafted yourself, that you evolved them over the centuries, and you are the custodians, and you put together all the mechanisms to implement them? What's happening to that? And they said, yes, they are there. And they shamefacedly admitted that we are grappling with the problem of double standards in Europe, in North America, in the so-called developed world. We have to come to grips with that. One factor which has hampered resolution, a peaceful resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, is the lack of response from the United Nations, the United Nations Security Council. It is United Nations Security Council's responsibility to implement its own resolutions. This morning I was talking to the French ambassador and I told her I represented Pakistan in the United Nations Security Council in 2012 and 2013. And I recall that over the weekends we would get together, all 15 members of the Security Council, to discuss the situation in Central African Republic or South Sudan or Mali or West Africa, but not on Kashmir. Although we regularly receive reports from UNMUGIP on the situation here, and as Raja Farooq Haider Sahib was alluding to one instance, that you do not have to buy people to broadcast crimes against humanity or war crimes in a volatile region like Jammu and Kashmir. But they absolutely know what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir. And that yet the United Nations Security Council would not take cognizance of the situation here. This is a tragedy of our times. And I talked about double standards. Now, I talk about our strategy, and a lot has already been said, and I endorse many of the points that have already been made. But let me tell you, I'll also be very candid, like my preceding speakers. One is that we do not demonstrate and project unity amongst our ranks. We have multiple and quite often conflicting voices, which are confusing our interlocutors in the West and in many parts of the world. We are not united. And as the Prime Minister of Azad Kashmir was saying, our effort is also not critical. He was giving a statistic that thousands of broadcasts were devoted to internal political issues. But not many substantive programs were done on Jammu and Kashmir. And yet, this tragedy is unfolding in a territory which is legally, historically, and in accordance with international law, is part of your state, such as the apathy. So while we criticize others, while we are thinking of mobilizing the international community and getting international response and global response, let's have a bit of introspection. Let's try to understand what is going wrong that with our own policy, that while our brothers and sisters are giving their lives, we do not have that kind of reaction and response that we should find in our national discourse. How much time the heads of the political parties in Pakistan are devoting to the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, or to the condemnation of human rights violations, gross and consistent human rights violations in Indian occupied Kashmir. Let me tell you, there was this gentleman called Mr. A.G. Noorani, he was here. And there was a book fair, and I was one of the panelists. And other fellow panelists, they were very suave, and they were talking about high politics, and they were talking about diplomatic solutions. And when Indians come here and sit in different cities and interact with the people of Pakistan, or Kashmir for that matter, they do not get the sense that Pakistanis are very angry about what is happening in Indian occupied Kashmir. At least, for God's sake, project your anger, project your renunciation of what is India doing it, project your denunciation of what India is doing, condemn it. That is your basic, initial moral responsibility. Now let me tell you that this is your primary responsibility. You're talking about getting global response, for God's sake. Close your ranks and try to forge unity and single-mindedly follow the agenda of the completion of the state of Pakistan and promotion and protection of the rights of the people of Indian occupied Kashmir, and use all the diplomatic or political methods that you have in your repertoire to save your brothers and sisters from the repression of the Indian occupation forces. Second, I think some speakers alluded to it, but they did not dilate on it. But let me elaborate. I'm very blunt about it. I've been talking about it quite frankly and candidly. I said that bilateralism, or the bilateral approach to the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, was a fatal mistake, because when we made that decision when we were psychologically weak. Our troops, the troops of Pakistan, were imprisoned by India. But let me tell you, since then, India has exploited bilateralism, and this, I've said many times, this track has been totally unproductive, because India has dissimulated, it has deluded you, and it has acquired veto on two things. One is the agenda of the bilateral talks, and as I mentioned to multiple audiences, that the core issue of Jammu and Kashmir between the states of Pakistan and India has been reduced to 1/10 of the agenda. And the second is that they have veto over the timetable. These infructuous talks will take place when India pleases. When it doesn't please India, they would say that I refuse to come to the negotiating table. I refuse to come to the negotiating table because you're terrorists or you're abetting terrorists. So we have to go back to the international forums. And we start with the United Nations Security Council. But that's not all. It's the General Assembly, it's the United Nations Secretary General, it's Human Rights Council, it is the European Parliament, it is Organization of Islamic Cooperation. To all my friends, I would say, for God's sake, don't trash the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Don't trash Ummat Muslimah, for God's sake. Because since 1990, in whatever form, they are standing with you. They stood by you. And every year they face pressure from India to dismantle OIC contact group on Jammu and Kashmir, not to include formulations on the Indian occupied Kashmir in the political communiques of the ministerial meetings and the summits. And these countries, despite their weaknesses, every year pass resolutions calling for the right to self-determination for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, condemning human rights there, and finally asking for the realization of the right to self-determination. And let me tell you that had India gathered support like this from any forum, they would have. थोड़ा सा इजाज़त दीजिए, इसके बाद मैं वैसे भी मुख्तसर करूँगा, हमारा एक और इवेंट है. Well, I'd like to wind up, I'll try to wind up in next 5 to 7 minutes. But let me tell you, I was talking about reconnecting with the international community, and because that would generate some pressure for India. You are not reaching out to international public opinion. And that's one of the weaknesses in your strategy. You've asked about the strategy. That is one of the biggest weaknesses of your strategy. And it should be mobilized at the level of the masses and at the level of academia and think tanks and so on. We have to work on our diaspora community. And diaspora community abroad, India's diaspora community, China's diaspora community, and for that matter, diaspora communities are very small, tiny countries. I know Armenia, how active Armenia is against Turkey, and Taiwan, and other countries or entities. They are so active, but we haven't used our diaspora community strategically. We use them. They of course speak up for Kashmiris, but it is sporadic, it is haphazard, it is not organized. We can't provide leadership to them. They are capable, well-heeled, they have political traction and influence within the countries of adoption, but we are not using them very effectively. It all boils down to, many speakers have alluded to that point, that we must invest in communication tools. Because India cannot defeat Pakistan either by using nuclear warheads or through conventional means. But I have been saying this, I have been underlining this point in many meetings, that they have defeated us in the realm of communication, in the realm of the media. Hands down. And we all know it. And we all talk about it. But we do not do anything about it. And that's why we have the kind of tragedy that the Prime Minister alluded to. That's why our media would devote more time to anti-Pakistan elements, political instability in Pakistan, and in fact fuel it, rather than devoting their time and energy to the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. And when we talk about communication, we are not talking about communication tools being used in Islamabad or Karachi or Lahore or Peshawar or Quetta or Muzaffarabad. Our target should be Washington and Brussels and New York and all cities of the United States, because that's precisely what is happening in these countries. When I was there in Brussels, I can tell you that Indians got very, very active. And they went to each and every interlocutor that I had engaged to tell them their side of the story. And it was not just the officials. It was academics and media persons and community leaders. I think that Raja Saab has said it quite authoritatively. I want to repeat it, that if you do not have a strong Pakistan, you do not have a case. And if you do not have a viable Azad Kashmir state, then the whole thing would vaporize, for God's sake. And therefore invest in Pakistan, and invest in Azad Kashmir, and be grateful to Pakistan. Because people like us, there are friends, my friends sitting here, with whom we have been waging the struggle in the diplomatic forums for the last 3 decades. They are present here. Let me tell you that we have very few staunch allies, but the staunchest ally of the people of Jammu and Kashmir is Pakistan. And people like us who are in this situation, they increase the number of their allies and friends. They do not reduce them. And they do not criticize and demonize their benefactors frivolously. We should have Pakistan +1 and +1 and +1 and infinity. Not try to scupper the edifice that we already have. Now, I would also like to say that we should reach out to the Indian civil society, because they can't be party to the crimes which are being committed by the Indian occupation forces under the tutelage of an aggressive government seated in Delhi. They can't be party to the crimes in Kashmir. And I would say that recently, you must have read reports that Indian armed forces have advised the government of India to start a political dialogue, for God's sake, with the Kashmiris. They say that there is no military solution. They have come to the same conclusion. We should reach out to the Indian civil society. Now let me tell you that we are glad that during the recent visit of the Prime Minister of Pakistan to One Belt, One Road Forum, the Prime Minister of China has reiterated his position supporting Pakistan. Earlier, Mr. Erdogan has been actively pursuing this issue. What we need to realize about India is that it is an interlocutor that doesn't believe in legality in regard to Kashmir. That it wants to use only the gun, and therefore you have to change your lexicon too. Because when you talk about international law, when you talk about legality of the, or the legitimacy, or what the UN Security Council resolutions prescribe or do not prescribe, you do not have any echo or resonance in India at all. None whatsoever. And here you have a dilemma, and you have a non-responsive global community. And how do you deal with this predicament? At times it sounds as if we are pursuing a monologue. We are speaking to ourselves, this audience itself. This audience. Is there one person sitting here who thinks that the UN Security Council resolutions should not be implemented? We are preaching to the choir. We are preaching to talking to the converted, for God's sake. And we hold such meetings day in and day out. I don't know what we're trying to do. Our position is already very well known. It is consolidated, for God's sake. We have to reach out. We have to counteract the conspiracies that are unleashed by our enemy. I think that I talked about the lack of national unity. I would say it is high time that we try to synchronize our positions. And yes, Raja Sahab was right. Why aren't all political parties here today? And if this is the state of affairs, we have differences. All democracies have differences, for God's sake. Why aren't they here? And we are, as I said, that the irony is that we are not even talking to outsiders, we're talking to ourselves, to the converted. Why aren't they here? And I think that as we go along, I hope that this forum would train people to get well versed in international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and international law itself. That this would document, and let me mention that Kashmir Media Service is doing a fantastic job. It would document the egregious human rights violations that are taking place in Jammu and Kashmir, and communicate it to the special rapporteurs and special representatives based in Geneva. And so that we can also build networks. Finally, I would say that just 2 points. One is that Dr. Khan, I'll be contributing an article because what I have said, these are my stray thoughts, which I put together after listening to some other speakers. And I had some points which I had jotted down prior to coming to this venue. But I hope that you will capture the essence of this debate and publish it. I'll contribute an article. So, and finally, I want to leave with this impression that while we are having this self-introspection, don't be demoralized. We will succeed no matter what. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
बहुत शुक्रिया जनाब सदर ग्रामी। अब मैं मुल्तमिस हूँ चेयरमैन पॉलिसी रिसर्च फोरम डॉक्टर मोहम्मद खान साहब से कि वो शील्ड्स फोरम की शील्ड्स जनाब मेहमानान ग्रामी को पेश करें। जनाब चेयरमैन शील्ड पेश करें। अमीर जमात इस्लामी आज़ाद कश्मीर से कि वो स्टेज पे तशरीफ़ लाएँ ग्रुप फ़ोटो के लिए 20 मिनट।
प्लीज़ सर सामने देखें।
डायरेक्टर कॉलेज और DPI फीमेल अगर यहाँ मौजूद हैं तो वो भी तशरीफ़ ले आएँ, उन्हें इस प्रोग्राम के बारे से रिपोर्ट
नीचे खड़ी हो सर, प्लीज सर सामने देखें। थैंक यू।